he didn't want to. Even though, in a corner of his mind, it was one of his fantasies to be invited to stay with the Tenbos, by _Akan_, he just didn't feel it was right anymore. But still. Well, if you're sure it's okay. Akan lead Ryouga upstairs, to the guest room. He couldn't help but feel nervous, since she was leading him up by the hand. He really hoped Ranma wouldn't find them together. He'd hate for him to get the wrong idea. Upon further thought, he really hoped Ranma found them together. It was about time the jerk was taught a lesson in humility. Well, here's the guest room. There ought to be a cot and some pillows in there, said Akan quietly, not wanting to wake anyone up. Knight, Ryouga. Thanks Akan, whispered Ryouga. See you tomorrow. Ryouga dropped his pack and stumbled, in the dark, towards the fudan. Less than it's already laid out. That's nice. Greater than not caring about neatness. Ryouga simply collapsed on the fudan sedge and quickly fell asleep. Dreams are odd. Especially after a large dinner, junk food, and several movies. Whoa, this is neat, said Yukaiu. She looked over herself in the grand mirror, astonished at how she looked in her white ball gown. It was shoulderless, sleek, and flowing regally. It made her feel like she was the most beautiful woman on earth. It seemed awfully familiar. Oh, I get it, said Yukaiu. Audrey Hepburn's dress in Sabrina. If that's the case, that means... She turned around, expecting to see a grand, outdoor area complete with couples in formal wear dancing and a big band orchestra, all of big and starlight. It was, after all, the right scene for this particular dress. And of course, it was all there. Yukaiu laughed. Ha! I've got the role of Sabrina. This is neat. Since she was dreaming, she shrugged and figured it'd be best to just go with the flow. She might even have fun. A hand tapped her bare shoulder. If this was Sabrina, the tough Toby Humphrey Bogart, here to sweep her off her feet. But who else would take the part of Bogart but Ronson? No, sorry. Ryouga. Well, yeah. Sorry about that, he said, smiling nervously. I know you were expecting Ranma. Guess I have less control of this dream than I thought, muttered Yukaiu. Oh well. The band paused briefly, then began playing while Diane Rose's scowls filled the dance floor one more time. Yukaiu couldn't help but notice the singer was Nebiki. Odd. That. Can't wake up, so I might as well enjoy myself, she said casually. Hey, Ryouga, wanna dance? I'd love to, he said, with a bit more confidence than she was used to seeing in him. He took her gently by her arm, then let her ask he danced casually, arms entwined, swaying to the music. I'm no Ranma, but I hope I'll do, he said, smirking with a bit of confidence. Yukaiu giggled. Oh, you'll be enough, I guess. She rested her head on his shoulder and sighed. Ryouga, you jerk, why can't you be like this in real life? Like what? He asked. more confident, more decisive, not such a wishy-washy moron with the Madagascar sense of of something that doesn't have a sense of direction. I dunno, said Ryouga. But what would you say if I said I like Ryu? I might. I don't know if I'm ready for this again. Maybe I'm not either. Yukai had to admit, that was a good point. I see what you mean, sugar. SHH, enough talk. Let's just dance for a while, okay? Yukai nodded slightly, then rested fully in Ryuga's arms, his gaze wide to the music. The mood, understandably, was very much romantic. Moonlight, elegant clothing, a grand dance under the stars, and Nabiki's surprisingly good rendition of Love and Rose certainly helped. It was eventual that Yukai's mind turned towards things that lovers do. You know, she said, letting a smile creep onto her lips, I've been wondering if you can be a good kisser. Didn't I kiss you before? Asked Ryuga. Yeah, you did, said Yukai, scowling, but you were drunk and you there thinking about Ken. Jerk. Oh, yeah, I guess I was, said Ryuga. Was I any good? It was like being kissed by a dog, said Yukai. Very sloppy. Oh. Sorry about that, replied Ryuga. I'll try to do better next time. Oh, so there's gonna be a next time? Asked Yukai with an amused smile. How about right now? Answered Ryuga. Ooh, you're being rather bold. This is a dream, right? Sheest. Seems to be, said Ryuga. Just a dream, she said, pulling him closer. In that case. Asterisk soft. Warm. Definitely. Pleasant. In Ryuga's half-asleep mind, a few minor alarm bells went off. There was a cause for alarm. The last time he felt these sensations, he was actually kissing Kodakai. He also was horrifically nervous about that sort of thing in general. The edgy, neurotic, panicky part of his mind nagged the rest of him awake, although not entirely awake. His senses began their usual morning checkup. Smell, perfume, maybe, and smell of washed hair. Taste, mild case of morning breath. Feel, warm, soft, holding something, apparently. Oh my. That was rather strange. The subconscious deemed that sight was needed immediately, even if it wasn't ready. Sight, dark brown, black, flesh tones. Need focus. Close eyes. Sound finally had something to report, a definite rustling off sheets. That made sense, right? After all, he was under them. Sight finally was ready for another try. Open. Long dark hair, slightly sharp face. Yukai. The logic bits of his brain went to work, pulling together the pieces of information obtained thus far and came to one conclusion. Ryouga was in bed with Yukai. Logic consulted with common sense, and common sense said that the situation was ridiculous. Logic must be mistaken. Logic died on for check, and while checking feel, accidentally turned on Ryuga's pleasure center and stated again that Ryuga was in fact under a blanket with Yukio in his arms. Common sense thought about it. Must be a dream. Must also reinforce this idea, else the entire system may overload from panic. Say it out loud. MFFM. HM. Speech isn't ready yet. Okay. Now. Millimeters. Muse BA. Dream. Yeah. The dream Yukio, as common sense decided to label her, seemed to respond to that. Choose. A dream. Ah, there, you see, said common sense. The dream construct confirmed it herself. Therefore, it had to be a dream. Nothing to worry about, so a general call for calm was put out. Just relax. Enjoy it. Theo had something new to report. There were lips on Ryuga's face, and they weren't his. The pleasure center managed to intercept this report before it got on logic and common sense. It liked the news a lot. Why? This must be a kiss. Oh yes, this was good. The pleasure center took over and suggested that Ryuga respond a bit. Logic's library of actions were woefully lacking in knowledge of how to properly respond, so the mind in general used its backup library, stuff Ryuga watched on television. That would mean kissing back a bit. Yeah. Holding the girl gently yet firmly as well. Good. Ah, yes. This was going rather well. Morning. Ranma and Akan were standing outside of the guest room, very unsure of what to do. So let get this straight, said Ranma. You told Ryuga to sleep in there, and you told Yukio to stay there? Asked Akan. Yeah. I didn't think anyone else would be there. So, you didn't see Ryuga anywhere else around here? He isn't in the dojo, said Ranma. Not in the bathroom. Not in my room. No way he'd be in Mr. Tenbo's room. And I really hoping to Nebiki or Kasumi's. I haven't seen Yukio around either, said Akan. And nobody since wearing the full Hadoukens. Said Ranma. Akan. They both looked at the guest room door. Would it be impolite to, say, check in there? Asked Ranma. It might be considered that, yes, answered Akan. They continued to stare at the door. We really shouldn't. You know, said Ranma. Absolutely, said Akan. Words, however, were different than thoughts. Those thoughts were being nagged by the powerful force of genetics. After all, Akan is the daughter of Sun Tendo, and Ranma is the son of Janma Sodom. And considering the way Sun and Janma behaved, the door opened silently. The two crept in without a sound. Oh my, whispered Akan. She is also, after all, Kasumi's sister. She was also blushing rather badly. Whoa! Yelled Ranma. He is, after all, Janma's son. This generally meant a lack of tact. This also woke up to certain people. Ryuga's brain snapped into focus suddenly. There was a reason for that, and the reason was currently draped over him, giving him a fairly passionate kiss. Ryuga asked. Why do you have to be so loud? You moron. Hissed Akan. Sorry. Sorry. Let's get out of here, yeah? Suggested Ranma. Common sense and logic screamed at the same time. This was not 80 a.m. Yukio was in bed with him and kissing him. His eyes flailed around wildly in panic, and that didn't help at all since I immediately saw Ranma and Akan staring at them in bewilderment. Ryouga's common sense and logic, being as frail as they were, immediately froze, along with his ability to move. Yukio, still with closed eyes, broke off the kiss with a sigh and snuggled closer. She was woken up slightly, but still in that morning haze that makes everything foggy. She felt good, oh, for a reason that escaped her mind at the moment. Less than morning. God opened the store. In a few minutes, greater than she blinked her eyes. There was movement off to the corner. She tried to focus and looked. Oh. Ronshan, Akan, how Yadlon? Ah, good morning, Ukan, said Ranma nervously. We were just leaving. Sorry about that, said Akan. We'll be downstairs. Before Yukio could get another word in, they were out the door. HM. Was there a hurry? She said groggily, closing her eyes. Time to open the restaurant. Ugh. No, definitely not yet. Too dear. She snuggled under the sheets and decided to get just a little more rest. Less than seemed be leaning on something greater than. She raised her head again and looked around. Ryouga. So that's what she was snuggling up against. Morning, Ryouga. Good morning, said Ryouga. A full minute passed. Something finally occurred to Yukio. Ryouga. Hey. Why yeah? You seem to be in bed with me. Why yeah? HMM. Neither moved. They were entirely unsure of what to do next. Ryouga was surprised that Yukio hadn't pulled him through the roof yet. Yukio was surprised she hadn't pulled him through the roof yet. What to do next was entirely unclear to both sides. Perhaps, Yukio thought, talking things through would be good. He realized this is the second time you snuck into my bed, said Yukio, her eyes still closed. Why yeah. This single quote is the second time he kissed me. Why yeah. He got a good explanation for this, yeah. Why yeah. Good. Tell me later, I need enough hour of sleep. And with Utana for word, Yukio fell asleep again. Not knowing what else to do, Ryouga fell asleep too. After all, he didn't get much sleep either. The reader may point out that Akan and Ranma seemed to be up and awake, although they got as much sleep as Ryouga and Yukio. What Ranma and Akan were doing up so early was, they would say, nobody's business but their own. Several long and uncomfortable hours later. The day went fast and silent after the morning's interesting start. Ryouga had silently pounded Ranma after he joked about what Ryouga and Yukio might have been doing earlier that night, and Yukio silently grabbed Ryouga by the hand and left for Ukan's. Wordlessly, they prepared for the weekend crowd, cleaning tables, arranging seats, cleaning the equipment, etc. etc. They handled the crowd with hardly a conversation. Just shouts after orders being made and orders to be brought. Afternoon melted into sunset which faded into nightfall, and still the two didn't converse with each other. Actually, they weren't sure what to say to each other. They still had no idea what to make of their interesting start to the day, and were very much afraid of making even more of a mess of the situation than it already was. And so there they were, at the end of the day, closing up shop and watching television, not saying anything of consequence to each other. Of course, this couldn't last forever, and of course, it was Ryouga who cracked first. About this morning, he said, sweating nervously. What about it? She asked, not looking at him. I mean, well, I'm sorry. Without emotion, without eye contact, she said, okay. Ryuga was puzzled. Okay. That was it. That was all. No promises of violence or accusations of perverted behavior. That seemed all too easy. This could mean only one thing. She was waiting for her vengeance. When he wouldn't expect it come, she single quote make him pay, and pay dearly. No, not a good thing at all. He was determined to avoid that underscore, which meant a little groveling. Unfortunately, hibikis don't grovel well. And considering this was a girl he was groveling to, and over a very embarrassing event, he, of course, babbled. I didn't mean to. Well, I just, you're terrible, you know, never gonna do it again. Accident, really embarrassed. This wasn't taken well by Yukayu. Especially with the bad word choice. What? You're saying kissing me was a big horrible experience for a while you? She yelled. Yes. I mean no. W-A-I-D. Pick your words with care, moron, snarled Yukayu. I mean, well, it was nice. It was, asked Yukayu, her face slipping from anger to a slight blushing sort of embarrassment. Why yeah, I guess, said Ryuga, keeping his gaze down. Why single quote word single quote T so bad yourself, said Yukayu shyly. I wasn't. But next time, said Yukayu, wake me up first, okay? Before any more words could be said she left for her room, leaving dumbstruck Ryuga standing there in silence. Her mind was swimming in a bit of confusion and worry. Less than did I just say that? Oh my gosh. I just said that exclamation point greater than as she slipped under the covers thoroughly. She constantly berated herself. Might give Ryuga the wrong ideas after all, and she knew how much Ryuga could become obsessed with a girl. She did not want that. No, Mumber absolutely not. Less than but it was a nice kiss. Greater than she fell asleep a little later, looking just a bit happier than she usually did. Asterisk Ryuga, meanwhile, was still sorting things out. Less than was she being sarcastic? Was she serious? I don't know what to do exclamation point greater than it was night, it was late, and so he decided to just forget about it all. Whatever will be. But he wasn't up to dealing with it now. Yes, sleep would be the best option. As soon as he found his room. END Part 12 Editor single quote S note. It isn't essential that you read it. But this story I linked to the fanfic, The More Things Change, and its forthcoming sequel double quote The Pursuit of Happiness. Yeah, the fic I've been working on for, 7 months at ************************************************************** A woman sat at her desk and appraised her computer. The monitor seemed to shine rather blankly back at her. Papers cluttered the area and had been strewn about rather haphazardly. She perused the file in her hand, which contained information on the most recent martial artist to arrive in Ranma. The file wasn't big at all. The woman in question was Nabiki Tendo. She was an information broker, and as such, she made it a point to know exactly who and what ways merging in Nirima. Nabiki didn't get involved in Ranma's little problems, no. But if he had ever bothered to ask and had the money to foot her service fee, she could have easily pulled up some interesting facts. Facts that could demoralize and just possibly crush the fighting spirit out of Ryouga, Kuno, or any of the other many enemies Ranma had made over time. His fiancées weren't safe either, as careful drudging had netted Nabiki more than enough full tidbits to keep her infinitely happy. She never wanted this out to Ranma, and given the current status of the fiancés and rivals, a little late, it was enough for her to know that she had at least a little leverage, or sometimes lots of leverage, especially in Kuno's case, to make them bend to her will. Having several of the world's most powerful and strange martial artists in her pocket was a reassuring feeling. This new arrival, was a mystery. Nabiki had very little to do, and it annoyed her a bit. Again, this was mainly due to the fact that said person was a complete stranger to these parts. She decided would have to be fixed, and soon. Until then, she felt that she might as well start a file. Name, Nuri, Tana female age, 16 height, 5 single quote 3 double quote weight, 80-90 pounds eyes, hazel hair, light brown, semi-short martial art, associates, enemies, history, personality, She paused to appraise the screen and frowned. There were too many question marks, not enough answers. This was no good. She saved bind formatting onto a file and shut down her laptop. Nabiki shrugged off her disappointment. It really hadn't taken long to find a stool pigeon, and it was one who would talk for a fairly cheap price at that. A wry grin formed on Nabiki's face, as later this day her pigeon would give her all the info she needed to fill some of those gaps. In a cafe in the commercial part of Nirima, Nabiki looked thoughtfully at her notes. Meanwhile, a somewhat lanky young man rose from the table. His long bangs fell loosely over his round-rimmed eyeglasses, concealing any emotion that may have shown there. At his side was a long case that appeared to contain some sort of musical instrument. The man looked as if he had just been paid, and rightfully so. As he now fingered through a small wad of yen to be sure it was all there. "Thanks, Tenbo-san," he said nonchalantly. "Just remember, Nagain-kun, if you hear anything more, let me know." Yeah. This came out a bit mumbled as the man finished his counting, turned, and stalked off towards the door. As he departed, Nabiki shook her head in disbelief. Just when she thought she'd do about anything for money, she meets Mr. Nagain Muhashi, and he was the very same one who'd previously sold out his family to her. Shuts. Now he'd given her much of what she'd needed on Miss Nuri. Nabiki looked down at her notes, sipped some more of her espresso, and filled in a few more blanks. Name, Nuri, Tanya Liazes, Oiri, Danny, Nori, Tanya Sex, female age, 16 height, 5 single quote 3 double quote weight, 80-90 pounds question mark eyes, hazel hair, light brown, semi-short martial art, unorthodox weaponry school of martial arts division house cleaning. Subdivision chimney sweeping left parenthesis. Skill level unknown, but rumored to be high. Associates, Nagain Muhashi ex-boyfriend, Oshimujishi sensei right parenthesis enemies, Ryouga Hibiki reason unknown right parenthesis history, recruited by the UWSMA reason unknown from the United Kingdom, enrolled 4 or 5 left parenthesis, years as a student of the UWSMA. Briefly involved with Nagain Muhashi reason unknown, has arrived in Mirimo with the intent to defeat Ko. Ryuga Hibiki reason unknown right parenthesis. Personality, generally quiet, not talkative. Tends to pursue any goals she sets with some intensity. Has shown flashes of brashness and a penchant for scheming. Is quick to annoyance or anger. Has a high level of pride and a strong ego. Nabiki frowned. That filled in the empty spots, but her history was definitely too short. In most circumstances, the history part of her subjects would generally be the largest and most interesting. Nabika'd, she had to wonder what Miss Nuri could be hiding, what bits of her past were yet to be uncovered. No sense frowning over it, she thought, and shut down her laptop computer. Standing slowly, Nabiki planned to waltz on over to Takei-kuma with some pictures in hand. If she played her cards, pictures right, she'd even get Kuma to foot the bill for the lunch she just ate. And Miss Nuri? Nabiki put that subject aside. All would be revealed in time. First attempt at a Ranma fanfic. Feel free to tear it apart at your leisure. I never once claimed to be good, just one with ideas. And here put to text, was one. Ranma 1/2 has shown us once or twice, not all martial artists are contemporary. Nor are they all Asian. With this, it thrust upon you. A young girl who is neither. This is the story of Tanya Nuri Ranma 1/2 fanfic by me. All characters depicted or mentioned in this story have the trademarks and / or copyrights of their respective holders with the exception of Tanya Nuri, who's mine, damn it. Colons and all comments and bashes to Mihashi at bdw.com. The pursuit of happiness. Side story. One thing leads to another. Part 1. Brutal youth. Somewhere in Manchester, England, a young, well-kept police officer did his best to keep a rambunctious child under control as he made his way up the stairs to a large, foreboding building. It's not fair. They can't take ER from me. Oh, such a tragedy. Poor dear. Well, we'll take care of her. These words of false sympathy poured from the mouth of a frightening, elderly woman as she stood in the doorway of the orphanage. The young child now squirming helplessly under the arm of a large body glared spitefully at the old biddy, who seemed every bit a liar to her. This woman just wanted to take her from her mum, and she knew it. The old witch continued, her mother's been hauled to the institute then. Well, the child is better off here anyhow. Miss Nori was a raving loony, she was. You just wanted to take her away, so you could make me sad. Well, I single quote, I'm not sad, I'm angry. You'll all pay for taking ER. You will. The Bobby, a young, strong-looking officer of law, nodded solemnly. Ms. Nori had never been quite right since her hubby had run off. At least, it looked as though he'd bailed on her. His disappearance occurred suddenly, only just months after the birth of the screaming child being held. He was gone without a trace, and Ms. Nori took it. Poorly, double quote, Tis a shame. A charming lass, she was. Going off like that after 4 years. Truly a shame. She'd seemed to almost gotten o'er it, too. Well. Nothing to be done of it now. Are you sure you can handle young Tanya there? This man was our friend. How could he allow them to take her? How could he? None trusted him. Evil man. Tanya Nori, the girl in question, could be a mean-spirited brat when she set her mind to it. This was one of those times. She just screamed on, bawled, flailing like a wild animal in the officer's firm grip. Twisting like a snake, she managed to plant a foot firmly to his groin, which resulted in a squeak and a wince. However, the body remained standing. He squeezed his arm around the child and she gasped, becoming stiller. She struggled weakly still, however, with the spirit of a devil. You'll pay. You'll see. You can't keep me forever. If me mum saw dead. She saw him. Damn it. I'll avenge you, mum. Wherever the idea. Now. You sure you can handle the way, babe? He queried, his voice a little breathless. Of course, came a cold, almost offended reply. The biddy pointed down the hall a ways. Just take her to room 9 and she'll be just fine. Tanya glared equally at this evil creature who presumed to talk over her life. An evil grin flitted across her face. just as she resumed her struggle. You, lady, will regret THD across me path. I'll get ya, I will. I'll get ya but good. Right then, ma'am. Shuffling through the door, the body dragged bucketing and screaming Tanya to her new room, pushed her in, and slammed the door as though capturing a raving wolverine. Core, she's a nasty one. She probably drove the missus to the bin herself. A loud, resounding crash came from beyond the door, and another dop 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 and yet another. The body sighed. Sounds like she's trying to bash the door in. Me thinks you got your hands full with THW beastie. Indeed. Well, Mr. O'Zolin, I'll just be seeing you out now, if you don't mind. The hag shooed the policeman out the door. Things to do, done single quote T you know. I haven't time to dabble. Right then, O'Zolin tipped his cap politely as he shuffled out, double quote good day to you, ma'am. He made his way down the stairs and out to Fifth Street as the door was slammed behind him. He grumbled, Saints preserve us, but that's a wild one. May they have the best of luck we are. They're going to need it. Asterisk, young lady. The girl in question sat quietly at her desk, staring in an absent-minded manner at the wall nearest to her. Anything was more interesting than Miss Bramley's lectures on multiplication, and young Tanya was always the first to show it. Young lady. There it was again, that annoying, sharp, elderly voice which Tanya continued to ignore in favor of not counting the holes in a ceiling panel. Not particularly interesting, but again, far more important than anything this old nag of an instructor had to say. T-A-N-Y-A. Okay, that got her attention, but only just barely. Piercing hazel eyes gazed up rather sullenly through puffy, even bangs. They settled coldly upon a slightly unnerved educator. W.O.D. Came the stiff, cut response. Miss Bramley sighed. Tanya Nori was the terror of Shildley, and well deserving of the title. She was mean-spirited, unruly, and often unkept child. One that was missing at all times of the day, only to be found setting up some horrendous and often potentially hazardous prank. This diminutive waif of a girl had the entire orphanage terrorized, and Miss Bramley was no exception. She was clearly more irritated than frightened, double quote MS. Nori, you all pay attention in this class, I'll see to that. The impudent child merely crossed her arms over her chest and sneered defiantly. She thought to herself in the standoffish silence, you'll break, you old egg, I'll be seeing to that. I won't be leaving here till I've made every last one of you lot miserable. Finally shattering some of the tension, Tanya emitted a vaguely HMPHLIKE sound. Whatever. The teacher flared. You'll all learn what I'm teaching if it kills me, damn you. It Jews might. By this time, every child in the class was silent. Dead silent. The teacher went RED. She pulled out a wooden ruler, to which the general class body's response was a group cringe. She approached the delinquent slowly. I've had just about enough of you, young miss. Right then. This was as good a time as any for a hasty withdrawal. Tanya scampered from her desk and bolted out the door. "Today, ma'am. Only your best classes debate," she remarked sarcastically as she fled the classroom. Her impish giggling echoed from the corridor, then progressed to silence as Tanya got out of range. Some of the other children began to giggle in spite of themselves, only to be silenced with a glare. It was then Miss Bramley launched into a torrent of cursing and loud mumblings, mostly to the effect of "They aren't paying me enough to take this, and if I was her mum, I'd switch her silly," which served only to set off more giggling. Tanya cackled mischievously to herself. Taunting Miss Bramley was always fun, and it was her biggest challenge to date. Tanya was now 8 years of age, and in her 4-year stay at Childly she had managed to scurry off 8 other instructors. After all, this was an orphanage, not a real school. Few were willing to put up with her abuses, especially coupled with the meager wages. But Miss Bramley, the old bat, she'd stayed on for almost a year now. No call for that then. Tanya would often find herself pondering, debating whether the teacher was stubborn, just plain stupid. Stupid, she assured herself. Definitely stupid. With a shrug, she clambered up through a loose air duct screen and disappeared, pulling the grate shut behind her. Several months later, well, it had all finally paid off. Tanya was a clever lass, far more so than any of the faculty at Childly Orphanage could have ever imagined, although the in-house staff experienced more turnovers than your average fast food joint. Few were ever given the chance to understand her. Not that anyone had the courage, patience, or desire to do so. Had any of the adults bothered to observe her, they might have noticed a cold, calculating tone to all her mischief. It was her job to make all acquainted themselves with this establishment a living hell, and she did a damn good job of it. Funny thing was, she could barely remember why. Now, Miss Bramley was gone. Barely a year there, and she had been the staunchest of the faculty. Tanya took a certain pride in knowing that it was indeed her who scared the wench off. But Miss Bramley, Joan. "Wait, please. Childly needs you." This was from one of the paper pushers, a mousy man in a suit that always seemed several sizes too large. Tanya never knew or cared what purpose has served. The old cow ignored him. She annoyed him. Oh, this was too great. Tanya giggled wickedly from her window in room number 9. She smiled almost cutely down at the ex-educator. Miss Bramley looked up at the wicked child, then clucked abrasively, "You don't need me. You need a firing squad. And now, you need a lawyer. Mine will be contacting yours. Good day." Put. He just stammered, stunned. Lawyer was not a word he wanted to hear. He gulped quietly, then sighed. He shook his head solemnly as he watched the woman go. The proprietors would not be pleased. Tanya cackled mildly to herself as she watched old Bramley hoof off to the taxi like the cow she was. Tanya giggled in a fit of mirth as the door closed on a bit of Bramley's dress, leaving it to flap in the wind as the taxi tore off down the street. Smiling, the self-proclaimed faculty basher ticked off another mark on her wall. Yes, she even kept track. Bramley had been a toughie, all right. It had taken a year of blatant disregard and feigned ignorance in class. 12 water bucket and doorway gags left parenthesis she never did learn each month to watch the doors, multiple times off greasing the woman's shoes at night with lard to mixed effects, varied incidents with mildly poisonous bugs, and one merely the unused prank which involved half a dozen hungry rats, a canister of honey mustard oven mitts, a rake from maintenance, and an externally locked bathroom door. Oh, but that was a good one, her pride in fact. Tanya puffed up triumphantly. It sounded like the old egg would too. A bit of recognition for just how cunning that prank really was. A day of triumph indeed. Tanya gleed as she watched old paper pushers slink back in through the entry doors. She knew where he was going, and wanted to watch him get chewed out. Quickly, she scrambled into her air duct and scampered along the passage with practiced silence. Well, that's it then. The voice seemed familiar, and rightfully so. Mrs. Middle was the only person who'd been a constant over Tanya's 4-year stay. This was the woman in charge. Not to mention the lady who had first taken Tanya in so many years ago. It wasn't devotion that kept the woman here, only that Tanya hadn't given her a reason to leave personally. Tanya wanted SOMEONE to see her in action at all times. Middle led the little man who had entered her office only moments ago, double quote you single quote rate absolutely positive then. She's planning to sue. All over Thought then, isn't it? Somewhere in the air ducts, a giggle was stifled. Well, yes. He stammered, no backbone at all here. The Noricile seemed to have a hand in it. All right. I think I have had just about enough. It has become apparent to me that the child is untamable. She is uncooperative, disruptive, has no desire nor shown any ability to learn, and has shown a distinctive tendency to mischief bordering upon violence. I don't care who single quotations, I want her gone. Oh, was Tanya's thoughts. I know where this going, and no sir, I don't like it. I think it's time I took officer roller up on that military school offer. She's nearly 9 now, and we can't be keeping her forever. Maybe other lads can beat sense into her. This would be where I make my hasty retreat. She paused only long enough to pick out minor details. Get me roller on the telly. I want her gone by Friday, no later, do you hear me? Right, ma'am. Galley, and it will be your head. Right, ma'am. I'll get him right away. I've until Friday. Easy. Luckily, I've made preparations. Time blow this fellow. She crept soundlessly through the ducts, back to their room. Asterisk part 2 on the outside. Asterisk. It was several months after her daring escape from Shildley. Well, maybe it wasn't so daring upon looking back. Tanya grinned smugly at her cunning, as she had stolen her idea from a novel she once read, and was particularly surprised no one had thought of it sooner. It was a simple matter to crawl through the circulation ducts to the laundry room. So early Friday morning, she packed up her meager belongings and snuck off to where the laundry was kept. Upon reaching her destination, she hid in one of the laundry troughs just before they were carted off for cleaning. Laundry trucks came every Friday, and that Friday was no exception. It was a flawless plan, and no one seemed to notice or care that she was gone. By noon, Tanya was well on her way to London. She had pickpocketed enough money from the Shildley faculty to afford a train. She figured that London was far enough away to evade the bobbies, and there, she could start her life anew as a petty thief. This didn't work out at all. Sitting quietly in her hiding place, Tanya was very fortunate it was midsummer, else the chimney she'd chosen to lay low in might have been in use. She took every care to maintain her silence, and would do so for she had erred severely and was not paying the price. Tobias were after her, and she wasn't sure if it was due to the fact she was a runaway, or if it was as a result of her recently botched attempt at shoplifting. She was sure it was for the latter, but disliked both prospects either way. Narrowly aiming the one item she'd managed to make off with, Tanya sighed. Today, her dinner would be a single orange. Hardly a meal at all. She actually pondered, ever so briefly, if she'd made a huge mistake running off. No, Tanya slumped a bit in her hideaway. They were gonna send me to military school in anyway. Better off dead than that. With a resigned shrug, Tanya peeled her orange and munched without a sound. Several hours passed like this, with Tanya slowly dozing off. For all the fights she offered, fatigue overwhelmed her. In order to get here, the girl had done an awful lot of running, and it was now beginning to catch up to her. She might even have fallen asleep, were it not for the distinct sound of footsteps approaching. Okay, now she was awake. Tanya was suddenly very still, and very frightened. Oh bloody hell! A face peered into the chimney, a dirty one at that. Well, would you look at that? More words might have come if the man hadn't received a facial mouthful of soot. ACK. Asterisk exclamation point cough cap exclamation point asterisk. He stumbled backwards, rubbing his face. Go away. What the bloody hell was that? It was a second voice, somewhat deeper than the first. So there were two of them out there. There's a kid in there. Asterisk cough cap asterisk. No wonder DH soot washed down into DH living room like that. Asterisk cough ways asterisk probably knocked it all loose, I bet. The man didn't dare poke his face in there a second time, double quote go away look see. Why donka? Jews, what kind of bloke do you take me for? Get a face full like you? I don't think so. A long pause followed. Then, hey, Donald. You okay? Blah. Asterisk hack asterisk yeah. Jews ducky. right then. They sure didn't sound like Dobbies, not by a long shot. Then again, Dobbies didn't exactly have a designated voice signature. Tanya knew she was in a great amount of trouble, all things considered. What would they do with her now? Well, I've come all this way for naught. I can't let myself end up like this. Go away. Another look then. The distinct sound of shuffling followed, then some grumbling and footsteps. Tanya swallowed hard. This was it. She could run, but where? She don't trapped herself but good in the narrow chimney of some London home. It was late now. Tanya had run an awful lot to escape, and she was very tired as a result. Almost too tired to offer any real resistance at all. A voice called out, "Come on out, lad, or I'm comin' in. And I'm supposin' that'd right be uncomfortable. Don't make me do it. A warm room with a bed would rather suit me now." The girl lunched a bit in her chimney. "But I've come so far. I don't want to go back." Then it dawned on her. "Lad, come on out, now. I have a job to be doing." This was still Vivacity, who had been called Donald. Tanya growled low, acquiring a minor aura. She had been called lads or boy by the other kids in the orphanage her first weeks there. This did stop after a while, once she beat the holy snot out of each and every one of them to prove them wrong. In most situations, this double negative would be proof positive that she was, in fact, a he. But no one dared make this joke lest she smite them further. Either way, she hated be called a boy in any case. This time was no exception. The other voice added, "Come now, time is money." Seething, she drew in a deep breath, finally going with the assumption that they were, in fact, not Dobbies. The soot-covered visage which arose from the chimney was, at best, indistinguishable. The two men blinked. Donald managed, "Core, he's a dusty one, ain't he, Foff?" Two leering eyes peered out from the child's soot-covered face. This comma, accompanied by the noticeable red aura she now wore, made the two men step back a bit. She intoned angrily, "I am asterisk not asterisk, a asterisk lad asterisk ah." "No." Donald quickly shoved his comrade forward. "Go talk TTH single quote la hyphen hyphen ER. Very quickly did he note the voice. "A girl? Top lady comma Jimmy hyphen boy ER. Right. Asterisk cold glare asterisk you talk TER." He counter-shoved Donald forward, none too gently comma double quote you found GR. Donald was a tall, gangly-looking man. There was little more he could do than to stumble towards the girl, having been pushed by a guy who looked a good bit brawnier than himself. He tripped forward, then did his best to maintain some dignity while attempting to regain balance. Straightening up, Donald approached the now vaguely glowing child. "Nothin', come on out, love, we won't be hurtin' ya." She thought about it for a moment, then looked the man over. He was very non-threatening, almost laughable in appearance, as he seemed to wear a fine coat of soot over his clothes. He was dressed in a simple black shirt with grey jacket and work pants. Donald also donned a dirty red scarf and a soft cloth cap which probably would have shaded his eyes, with sun out. On his feet were steel-tipped shoes, a mark of a teddy comma, but the soot smudged on his face and the brushes and brooms he carried were a dead giveaway. She resisted the temptation to giggle. It was a chimney sweep, and he looked like he'd stepped right out of a storybook. For all her efforts, a grin broke on her face. She quickly noted the offer was dressed similarly. Donald blinked, then melted into a somewhat silly smile. They're not common, see? We're friends, right? Tanya finally giggled in spite of herself, then reluctantly climbed out off her chimney. She was still maintaining a mildly threatening glow. Enthusly tried to stay wary of the two strangers. Who are you? What do you want? She was ready to bolt if need be. But on a rooftop, as it were common, she had no idea where she'd go. The gangly one took a bold step forward, but took no more when he saw the girl start to tense. I'm Donald, and me mate there's James. We're not going to hurt ya, lass. What are you doing up here this time o' night? She was really too tired for a snappy retort, but managed one anyway, double quote I single quote meter admiring DH stars. I am. Tanya made sure this dripped with sarcasm. Oh, I see. Donald rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Won't your parents be worried about you way up here this time o' night? A lot o' strange ones roaming about, don't you know? That's right, a fine yar. Lass such as yourself out by your lonesome and all that. Hardly seems proper. The other couldn't help but add. He never could stay quiet, a trait that occasionally found him in trouble. Who are you to tell me what's proper? Well, and me parents'll ne'er know. No. Mumber. Donald pondered his next words carefully, still unsure what exactly Philas meant by this. Come now. We'll be talking yo me now, afore some yon misses ya. No. I'm not going back. She'd yelled this in a rather frightened voice, one that betrayed the boldness of her appearance. Tanya had all but startled the chimney sweeps, and herself. The girl really was afraid, far more so than she dared to let on. Regardless, this response certainly got their attention, as well as maybe drawing the attention of passerbys below. Maybe we should be talking flies elsewhere. Won't you come with us and talk a bit, lass? The finger of the two had noticed spectators below gathering, and didn't create for it at all. We'll take a TTH van. You're just trying to trick me. Really? What do I have to lose? They can't be worse than the authorities. James finally noticed what Donald kept glancing down at. Looky there. Core, we're drawing an audience. We're audience? This would be a good time to leave. And these two seem madness enough. Besides, she could probably get away if she needed to, double quote okay, I'll go. But I warn ya, I'll run at first opportunity to try to single quote arm me. We'd never dream of it, lass. Donald offered his hand forward to Tanya. We'll get you down from there first. Then we talk, right? James continued to look down at the gathering London folk. He even nodded to them, smiling innocently. Tanya carefully took Donald's hand, her slight aura fading to nothing. Donald sighed, then dragged his idiot partner away from the side of the roof. Cut it out, you cad. Let's move. We'll get the chimney on our way back. Just tell Corey something came up, and we won't charge him to make up for it. He'll understand, for free. Cor, damn right he'll understand. James grumbled, but nodded. Right. Strapping his brooms firmly to his back, Donald gathered up the girl and nodded to James. Shortcut, Jimmy boy. James grimaced. The shortcut involved him climbing down and getting a bulky, heavy ladder from the van. It wasn't that he wasn't strong enough, not by a long shot, but it was mostly just a terrible hassle. He grumbled and disappeared over the edge of the roof, uttering a muffled double quote right. As he went, Donald nodded solemnly. He's a good lad, me finest friend, and I hope he earns it up. 3 years had passed since Tanya's encounter with the chimney sweeps, and an interesting 3 years they were. They had taken pity on her, after she'd explained everything she'd been through. Not only had he not turned her over, they took her on as one of their family. Donald went through an extreme amount of trouble for the girl. He'd taken an immediate liking to her, pulling a few strings, no, a lot of strings. He'd managed to see to it that nobody noticed as one long-gone filling clerk misplaced a few important records on a runaway orphan who really wanted to find. At some new, false records mysteriously appeared in their place, regarding a young boy by the name of Danny O'Leary who would be staying with his Uncle Donald for a while. In order to better conceal the girl, they had made her dress as boys. She cursed and hollered up and down about this, but finally had to admit, it was a great disguise, and she so much looked the part. The final touch was the local schooling. With a few called-in favors, Danny was easily enrolled, his papers mysteriously all in order. Tanya never knew or understood what Donald had done exactly, nor all the work he'd had to do following the trouble he'd gone through. She knew only that she was comfortable where she was. They treated her like family, and expected her to work with them to earn her keep as well. This was no problem, as Tanya grew to love the profession. Getting paid to under the roofs and pop about in the chimneys. That was the life. To say she loved her work was an understatement. Staying with her newfound family, Tanya learned a lot about the business history. It was a very small-time endeavor, and something of a family tradition. Donald had become a sweep like his father and grandfather before him. They were very traditional, and kept a small clientele who valued their services greatly. See, they did things in the old style, the old stereotypical brooms and cleaning equipment. No corners ever cut. Donald had a very important reputation to live up to, being the only child in the family. It was a bit harder than one might expect. It was strictly a family thing, but when his father finally died, he was forced to take on a partner to keep the business going. This was James. James had always been a class chum of Donald's. old school pals and whatnot. James was a bit bigger than Donald, and not nearly so bright, but he was always a true and loyal friend. They would goof off upon the rooftops while Donald's father would do whatever chimney maintenance was required of him. Needless to say, they got yelled at a lot. This however, kept James fairly close, and he was the first to offer his assistance when the elder had died. Donald gratefully accepted. With the business being so exclusive, it had a lot of close ties. Donald and James would often do favors and such, not the least of which was some basic maintenance other than chimney cleaning. This garnered many favors, most of which Donald called in the day he took on Tanya. This, she never fully realized. Tanya, again, knew only that she was content, and it was her staunch mission to make the both of them proud of her. In school, she made a lovely boy, and as Danny she was never teased nor was her gender ever questioned as it had been back in the orphanage. This was both a relief, and very disturbing to Tanya. After all, what that told her was that she made a better boy, and that annoyed her to no end. Either way, she never complained, nor did the girl ever give away her secret. Her instructors found her to be a marvelously sharp child, and often was she commended for her wit and cunning. Praise was rather alien to the girl, and decidedly, she rather liked it. Donald had planned to enroll her in a sort of martial arts class. With her wandering the streets on occasion, he grew more and more paranoid. It took him a good year before he could work a favor out of instructors there. Donald was one who didn't care to pay for a thing he could labor for them. Tanya found herself enrolled in a taekwondo class, and she absolutely adored it. It was an excuse to beat on someone if she ever felt the need or desire. Even now, she was still every bit the violent child she had been, only more in control. In her 2 years there, she had proven to be an excellent student, one you all learned fairly quickly. However, her temper still tended to flare in combat, often hurting her opponent to unnecessary extents. Admittedly though, she was brutally efficient. It wasn't long before she'd convinced a lot of the teachers to train her in various weapons, not the least of which was the staff. By the end of that 2 years, she had achieved a red belt in the art. It was rightfully earned, as Tanya had become quite good. With staves she excelled. The very idea of extending the distance at which she could strike had caught her fancy. The reach was nice, and it felt very right in her grip. And, most of all, her sweet brooms were an awful lot like staves, only weighted to one end. Using what she'd learned, Tanya had soon trained herself to compensate for the uneven balance. Once she'd achieved that, her desire was to incorporate her sweet tools into the art. Tanya had initially thought this would impress her masters. It didn't. There was the sound of a violent crack then a shriek. This was shortly followed by the sobbing of a 12-year-old boy. Tanya was always rough on the boys. They deserved it anyway. If he had any idea it was a girl stomping their arse. Danny. She didn't respond immediately, Even after 3 years of having the name comma, there were things that could still distract her from noticing. The punk child on the floor holding his now bleeding cheek was one of them. Thought you were pretty tough, eh, boys? I don't care how much older they were. This thought was interrupted by a very loud asterisk thwack asterisk to her skull. Shwinked. UI. What's th big idea? Mr. O'Leary. How many times have I said not to bring those things into class with you? This was barely short of a yell. Teacher was miffed and the things he referred to were 3-foot poles ending in wire bristle brushes which splayed out in a circle about the tip. She was now wielding one in each hand. Obviously, these brushes were sweeping tools, but the metal bristlets were a bit of a curiosity. Actually, Tanya had custom-made them to be weapons, and the iron fibers were her added touch. Well, sir, they're technically short staves, right? Whispering went on in the background. Something along the lines of double quote single quote. How did he get those in there? Dunno. Didn't see dot. Where would you hide things like those? He pulled them from thin air. He did. This was silenced by another instructor who wanted nothing to do with the situation, and wanted his students to follow in suit. Staves. The enraged master bellowed this. Tanya honestly didn't see the big deal. She'd been at this almost 2 years now, and was rather surprised the inventive, modified staves didn't impress. But this was no matter. This had been the 5th or so times he'd used them in class, and now, it was a sort of defiance thing. Staves? Indeed. He helped the crying child up and examined the damage. It was rather serious, and he flushed pale when he could just make out bone through the badly ripped cheek. The towels they were using had soaked up much of the blood, but it was apparent an ambulance would need to be called. Right. Gordon, call the paramedics. And you Daniel O'Leary, do not return here ever again. She shrugged. It really wasn't a big deal. She hadn't broken anything so the words would be some scarring. No biggie. But oh well. Tanya nodded, and said in a largely mocking tone, sir, on her way out. She'd learned all she could hear anyway. Oh, Tanya was sure, Donald wouldn't be happy one bit. It was hours later, and Tanya found herself walking along an alleyway just north of her home. She had been stalling herself all this time. Donald's going to be so disappointed, was the thought for the passing moments. Rather than go home and tell them right away, the girl opted to wander, carefully pondering the words she would use. Whatever words would smooth things the best. She didn't notice the men who happened to be approaching her swiftly from behind. They had, however, noticed her, and dressed in her sweet clothes. Did she ever look the easy mark? Tanya mumbled to herself, 2 years at that lousy school. Think they'd be teaching me something use asterisk. She was cut off when she heard the distinct shattering of glass. What th? She spun to face the noise. The noise was one man wielding a broken bottle, with a second holding tight to an iron pipe. They were dressed in leather, with steel-tipped shoes. Ted's for certain. They approached slowly. All we wants is your wallet, Lee boy. And the door was the foul utterance of the one bearing the pipe. She backed up carefully. Only two? But are they ever nasty-looking blokes? Right. Shouldn't be toward. The men continued to approach. They didn't think much of the short stack sweet broom strapped to her back. And they thought even less of him when she drew both and held them forward defensively. What? Gonna sweep us to death? The two had a quick laugh at this. I Jews might. Little to no time was wasted on words. She was gone suddenly. Thinsavere out loud asterisk cracks asterisk were heard and a sickening asterisk squid asterisk. With that comma the pipe man was on the ground shrieking. He looked a bit mauled, far worse than he actually was, holding his now blood-stained side-on awkwardly bent arm. Oleishi hyphen asterisk was the cut response. There most certainly were other words he'd desired to say, but they were silenced as he caught the end of an iron rod with his jaw. This knocked him sideways, but didn't keep him from steadying and lunging for the girl. A lad. Big mistake. He jumped quickly, and only just caught Tanya's shoulder. It was enough to send the child reeling across the pavement. Oh, hurt? Hurt. Damn. Can't feel me arm. She scrambled deeper into the alley, just barely ahead of the still slight light as Teddy boy. Now I'm gonna kill ya, you wee bastard. He found himself alone, double quote come on out. No sense in. You're dead walking, you're. Pulling through a belt pouch, she drew forth a small egg-shaped item. Let's see then how these chemicals work. Drawing aim on the point, Tanya threw the egg thing as hard as she could. It hit its mark. Face dot left parenthesis bingo. The Ted flailed, flinging his bottle in a random direction and hitting nothing. He grabbed for his face and eyes, where smoke was now rising from its surface. All he managed was an incomprehensible scream. It was then Tanya drew in for the kill, so to speak. Adrenaline kicking in, the blinded kid stood little to no chance as he was bludgeoned into unconsciousness. That done, Tanya found herself panting. Her bruised arm fell to her side as the adrenaline rush faded. She leaned against a wall, sagging into it. Sheathing her tools, she rubbed her shoulder, and tried to resist crying. A figure stepped out from the shadows, and at her narrowly. Bad timing. Tanya really wasn't in any shape for another fight. She only whispered, "Who are you?" The man bowed low and stepped forward. He was noticeably foreign combination for certain. He only nodded. "You are Danny O'Leary? Or should I say?" Tanya asterisk Nuri. Tanya blinked. "Yar. Cover. No wait, he already knows who I am. Well, I'm caught. You don't look like a Bobby," was all she could think to say. "I am not." The man offered his hand to Tanya. "I am Jishi. Oshimagiichi. You have a strong spirit, and we have some interest in you." "We? Hi. What? Yes. Well, that was fruitless. Tanya decided to query a bit further. This man was obviously not an authority of any kind. Who's this way? I noticed your fighting style. That lot was once your dojo only days ago. It is very interesting, to say the least. You use brushes and brooms. Chemicals. Unusual to say the least. Northeast. Problem with that? Yeah, no problem. In fact, it is what attracted my attention. Jisha nodded the surroundings with a bit of disgust. I should like to talk to you further. Perhaps elsewhere would be more appropriate. I think I have a proposition for you. Finally catching her breath, Tanya nodded. Right. She was still wary of the stranger. Now about a bit of tea. I know a nice dine-in. She nodded. He was certainly dressed for nicer places. He worried that too much time in this alley might ruin his nice business suit. He didn't have many, after all. Please, lead the way. Tanya nodded carefully, then made her way out of the alley. At no time did she take her eyes off the gentleman. Nori becomes Nori because in Japanese Ri doesn't exist. It had taken 3 hours and a rather costly meal to finally sway young Tanya's trust, but it was worth it. She had convinced the girl that her best course of action would be to join him in his journey back to Japan. He had been watching her over the last week, and her skill was wasted in such a conventional environment. She was satisfied that this tomboyish child would easily fulfill his obligation to the school. Strong, spirited, and talented. She'll make a fine pupil. I needn't convince her family now that this is the best for her. Her gift I swasted here. It can be refined at the dojo. He had faded only ever so slightly with his thoughts, and Tanya's voice brought him back with little to no effort. Okay. So, you were saying there that you'll use me, feed me, and train me for free then? It sounded too good to be true. She'd never thought she'd have the opportunity to travel to the Orient, much less live there, double quote, and you'll teach me tea better, use me brooms better, right? She nodded solemnly. They'd gone over this part of the conversation 3 times before. And no, the answer wasn't any different. And she continued on, counting the perks on her fingers. I'll get to spar with other blokes using me tools, as well as learn the local language so I can talk with them, right? The learning of a new language effort was easily the cincher. Contrary to popular belief, she did enjoy the prospect of gaining new knowledges. The sensei again nodded. This, too, had been gone over 3 times previous. So, where do I sign? But we need the consent of your peers. I dare not worry them unnecessarily. I think they can be persuaded. However, she stood calm, leaving money and tip for the waitress who'd served them. He looked down at the girl and knew she had no way of understanding how financially bad off her family was. He'd quickly realized it would be a simple matter to show them it was indeed for the best. He needed only first convince the girl of it as well. This went well. Tanya was more than anxious to go. Tanya stood and stretched. There had to be a catch somewhere, but if there was, she couldn't see it. Okay. I hope you're right. I've never he goes so far away. I don't know. The other thing of note about this exceptional child was her history. And the information his people had gathered on how she had become he. The routes used for this were far less than legal. She could use that if it came down to the wire, but he really loathed blackmail or strong-arm methods. Willing was far more to his liking, and this diplomatic way with words would likely net his dojo a new student as well as prove convenient for all involved. I don't know why the UWSMA wishes to have students from so far north, but I am pleased to have found one youth so much potential. Now, if her rebellious streak can be shaped into obedience, there will be no problems, and she will excel in her learnings. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully, then stated in a calm voice, I have little time to waste. Take me to your family so I may converse with them. Okay. This'll be cool. Tanya bounced from her seat and took off, intent on leading the man to where she knew Donald and James were working at the moment. She halted long enough to inquire, "Do you mind roofs much?" She was the master sensei of the housekeeping and maintenance dojo, he single quote, "He done far more tedious things than roof hopping. And all in a nicely kept suit as well. I'll manage." Nodding, Tanya rushed off out the door. She strolled out casually, waiting for the door to close behind him before chasing off after they met. It was after 20 minutes of bounding from rooftop to rooftop that they finally stumbled upon the two chimney sweeps. Donald, for one, was over life surprised at the appearance of a middle-aged Asian man in a white suit, but seemed to handle it fairly well with all things considered. It was just a bit unusual to get such a well-dressed visitor while on the job, especially 3 stories up at the base of a chimney. These things just didn't normally happen. James seemed oblivious to it, his only comment being, "Fancy that." Ash disappeared into the chimney. She approached the two carefully, more like one. James was far too busy with the chimney to be bothered, it seemed, and stated in a proper, delicate tone, "Gentlemen, I believe I have a proposition for you that should be in the best of interests for all parties involved." Oh, double quote, asterisk, part 3, turning Japanese, asterisk, 2 years later in a small, wooden, and very traditional tea house, 2 elderly gentlemen, both wearing kimonos, drank tea and chatted of various things. This was where they went to relax. "So, how goes the new student, Shishi-san?" said one of the 2 men, idly perusing a newspaper. He stroked his beard. The other smiled. "She progresses quickly, Miyagi-san, beyond my expectations." "What was her name again?" "Nori Tanya." "Again, isn't she?" She nodded and reached for the business section of the paper. She was rebellious at first, indeed. He chuckled, thinking of how odd she looked. A little girl so full of stubbornness and pride. But after a while, with a little stern discipline and careful guidance, she's quickly become the top of her class. "Did you hear of her current relations?" She is currently being courted by Mr. Mahashin. She paled. Not Him. No, no, no. Not Rio. The other one. She sighed with relief. Tell me, She, was it your teachings or natural talent which elevated Nuori-san in her martial art abilities? Queried Miyagi. At first I had to get through her stubbornness. Difficult, that was. But once I overcame that, her progress was amazing. A natural martial artist, that Nuori-san. I was hoping you might enlighten me on dealing with Him. The eldest Mahashin. Sensei Miyagi nodded sadly. In the martial arts, he is indeed sharp, but he is not easily motivated. Once he established himself as the finest student in the dojo, he became content and lazy. Surely he has something that motivates him. For Nuori-san, it was the art itself, and the spirit of competition. She wouldn't admit it. Buffy was feeling a little proud at the moment. Oh, he is motivated. By forces I do not wish to use. He sighed, double quote. However, my fellow senseis have resigned themselves to it. Sensei Jishi's expression turned to that of concern. Oh, if someone threatens to become talented enough to overtake him in his standing as #1 student, _ he is motivated. But he does not stop at training. He faces his rival in a duel and tries his best to not just defeat, but humiliate his opponent. He is fueled by prestige and hate, it seems. Sensei Jishi nodded solemnly. Good talent, but a dishonorable soul. Sensei Miyagi sighed. I only hope that this plan that the others have used won't backfire. Plan? Mahashin-san is currently ranked at #2, and will stay there. He is training harder, as a result, but I fear his hatred of the new top student will overshadow everything else. She patted Miyagi on the back. The way of the martial artist is fraught with difficulties, Miyagi-san. So says the sensei with such a willing student, replied Miyagi. I did say she was stubborn at first, did I not? Replied Jishi, double quote. Believe me, Miyagi-san, that first year was very difficult. She had beaten up any student that she thought may have been insulting her, and would even presume to tell her instructors how things should be done. Did Mahashin-san ever do that? No, muttered Miyagi. He just found loopholes in our rules and took every advantage of them. Oh, a warrior's skill and a lawyer's heart. Miyagi just nodded tiredly. Ah, well, Miyagi-san, I think it's time I check on my student about now. We are supposed to go on a small training trip sometime later. Very well then, good day, Jishi-san. Good day, Miyagi-san. Tanya yawned and stretched. It's been a good day, then, hasn't it? Shuddogged to herself, grinning widely at her achievement. It hadn't been more than 2 hours ago that she had finally perfected her Hyakugara Shuru, a technique involving the spinning of a chimney broom until bristles literally launched at a target. Not only that, she'd even managed to carve a bit of Kai energy into it, sending the sharp needles hurtling that much faster towards a target about 70 feet away. This was a rather new thing for her altogether, and it was the first time any of her robots actually utilized the inner power. Short of the pride she gained with the achievement, Tanya received a rather noteworthy score on the test she was taking and was rewarded with a day to kick back and rest. She was doing just that. Wait until I tell me, folks. They'll be proud for certain. Her thoughts drifted back to a rooftop conversation from long ago. One in which a saddened but understanding Donald agreed to transfer the care of Tanya over to a man he'd never before seen, Shishi, in effect, to Theosma. It was an excellent decision, one that had proven to do nothing but alter the child for the better. She frowned slightly. The girl did miss her family dearly, but was happier now than ever before that she had decided to join the housekeeping/maintenance dojo. They'd be proud of me now, they would. Ignore. Gotta call him tonight. Tanya smiled and sat up, looking down from her perch upon a roof beam in one of the sparring buildings. It had become something of a habit for her to hide away in the rafters on her free days, and today was no different. She had crept up there unobserved, and now watched the happenings unnoticed. Her attention was drawn to a duel between two oft umbrella fighters, HM. Squinting, she recognized them both. Ryouga, Nagane's brother. This caught her attention more than anything come as she she always wanted to see her boyfriend's family in action. The other was Ryouga. Something. The family name eluded her, but Tanya knew he was supposed to be some sort of fighting prodigy. Ooh, this ought to be a good one. With that thought aside, she kicked back and watched silently, unnoticed. Well, she thought so anyway. The fight came to a rather climactic end, with several blows struck between both combatants. She had been observing the battle for quite some time now and, to her shame, found herself kinda rooting for the Ryouga boy. It seemed only right. Tanya always did cheer on the underdog. And to her eyes, the boy was losing. Besides, Ryouga was cuter. Her attention intensified as she watched Mohashin whip his umbrella forward in a fluid motion, pressing the tip to the prodigy's throat. Tanya managed to stifle her gasp, thinking, ye gods, he's kinda tilted. Her reflex was to jump down to join the fray. This was halted promptly as something struck her face and suctioned there. A muffled leap came from Tanya, who now worked to free a plunger from her face. Ah, my pupil. It is not your business to interfere. Sit and watch, young one. He pulled the plunger free with a quick tug. Sensei? Hi, now be still. But, Sensei, will he not kill him? Tanya's Japanese, often frothing greatly over the years, still left much to be desired. Fortunately, her sentences were mostly passable, though hardly eloquent. SHHH. Sensei knew best. Among many things, a certain sense of obedience had worked its way into Tanya's persona. It wasn't programmed, however, it had built over time. She'd experienced time and time again that Sensei was always right. Well, mostly right anyway. And he could knock her silly at a moment's notice if he had to. Jishi's voice noted softly, "These two are the bitterest of enemies, spawned unknowingly by their dojo's senseis. One of them doesn't know of the cold rivalry kindled between them." He nodded solemnly. "They're the finest of the environmental extremes dojo, Hibiki Ryouga and Muhashin Ryo." Tanya loomed on, exhaling gently as Ryo finally lowered his umbrella, seemingly influenced by the protests from his sister. She nodded. "Ah. So they hate each other? Why? It is a hatred kindled by jealousy. Both are fine warriors, yet Onai is highly revered for his strength and ability to learn quickly, whilst Yopra is constantly chided for being less of a fighter." "Oh, is that so? Ryuga is the one who replaced Ryo as best Northeast?" She nodded solemnly. "That is rather unfair." Her eyes followed Ryo as he stalked off, looking rather peeved. Megane had mentioned Ryo had a rival for who was bigger. He never went into depth on it though. Why didn't he kill Ryuga? That would have solved his problems. Then he would be best again. She shook his head. "Who's to say why? Perhaps it was honor that kept him. Or maybe fear. It could be any number of reasons. I like to think it was a sense of honor." He rubbed his chin thoughtfully. To kill such a fine combatant in cold blood would disgrace his dojo. Nodding, she admitted, "I'm glad he did not. We would have to come in and clean up." She giggled. It was a joke, though poorly worded at best. "Oh no. Hi. It was a joke lost to Jishi completely. Anyhow, if I'd come to remind you, your new training begins tomorrow. Please, he would like a show of dedication, Northeast. I know this is your free time, but a bit of practice never hurts. Hi. Asterisk grumble asterisk I will do that soon, Sensei." "Very good. For now, I bid you good day." The words "goodbye Sensei" didn't make it from her lips before Jisha disappeared completely from sight. Damn, he's so good. Thinking a bit further on it, she shrugged. "I will have to ask Megane more about it later." With that, Tanya turned her attention to some of the other fights. If nothing else, UWSMA was well known for battles which looked either terrifyingly deadly, or tragically hysterical. Her sights fell to a French battle mine dueling with an American fighting plumber. This was decidedly going to be entertaining. Asterisk part 4 one way or another I'm gonna find ya. I'm gonna get you. Asterisk it couldn't have been more than a week or two later. Tanya now found herself in friendly competition for a best-of-class title. It was mostly for bragging rights, but it was far more to her, as no battle of any sort was ever friendly with Tanya. She thought to win, and that lost at. This also happened to be the last step in her newest training, as well as the final bout in the minor tourney. Her opponent, a young Asian boy who'd seemed to have mastered the art of yard maintenance. Looking her enemy over coldly, She knew he was good. Damn good. She'd seen him fight before and knew his weapons of choice were generally a huge pair of hedge trimmers, nasty at best, and various rakes and shovels. Luckily for Tanya, he never got his hands on a weed whacker. The boy took up a defensive crouch, trimmer in hand. He snapped it open and shut for effect, and it had been trying to intimidate. It was successful. The boy in question was known only as Kumaid, and Tanya had never heard him called anything else. He stood about 5 feet tall, and really didn't look all that intimidating. Rather, almost on the inoffensive side. The huge hedgers belied this otherwise mostly harmless appearance. And, to reiterate, even she had to admit he was good. The bout was to 3 hits, and Tanya tensed nervously as she anticipated the call. This would decide her ranking and show her sensei that Shirley was the best. This wasn't just a tourney. It was status. Status was very important. She resisted the urge to jump as the word fight left her sensei's lips. Kumaid leapt into action, lunging high with the clippers, then sweeping low at Tanya's feet. She was caught only slightly off guard and managed a clumsy, awkward cartwheel to avoid both. Tanya returned to her stance, carefully twirling her sweet brooms. This was going to be a long, grueling fight. 20 minutes went by, and yet the bout still raged on. The two stood in their ready positions once more. Kumaid had just scored a point, and it had been a good, solid point at that. Tanya held her now-bleeding side, where the rake had ripped across it like a tiger's claws. This was the point that brought Kumaid's total up to 2, tying him with Tanya's score. The other point had only grazed her arm, barely bruising the limb. Tanya's points had been a bit nastier, as one tore open Kumaid's shirt and left uncountable deep scratches diagonally across his chest, while her first point gashed across his leg, leaving the boy with a slight limp. It amazed Tanya that, with his injuries, Kumaid didn't surrender. But now, with the score tied, she knew for certain that was out of the question. Oh, bugger got me one good there, he did. No matter single quote will be an easy win for certain now. He's limping far worse now than before, and that last point was Jew's luck. 'Twas. She held her sweep brooms to either side once more, again ready. She had the two carefully. It had been by far the bloodiest and most dedicated fight he'd seen in some time. He watched carefully. Injuries so far were but flesh wounds, deep as they were. The two would easily survive the bout. That was, unless the last blow scored cause or dread damage. As he watched Tanya, he could see a bit of fury building, unhealthy fury, perhaps even deadly. She was concerned that she might lose it. He sighed, and I am here to make certain she does not. Kumaid was far more disciplined, so she didn't even give his demeanor a second thought. Fight. The combatants tensed at the word, then, *boom. Crash. Crash! Exclamation point *. Suddenly there were screams of panic as rocks and debris flew everywhere. Unable to resist the compulsion, Tanya looked up. What bloody hell? Came her words. In English. What is hyphen asterisk asterisk ACK asterisk? It was over in a flash. Something swept Tanya's feet out from under her, and she found herself on her back, pinned to the floor. Opening her eyes, she could just make out the hedgers that now held her in place by a hairneck, one blade to each side. Full point. Victory to Kumaid. WOD? But that's not fair. I was distracted. She screamed in her British tongue. A soft asterisk thwack asterisk was heard as Tanya again found a plunger suction to her face. She spoke softly. It is your own fault, Nori-san. You allowed yourself to be distracted. In a real battle, it would have been your downfall. Kumaid did not allow the disruption to affect him. The point is fair. You are an excellent fighter, but you still have much to learn. He plucked the plunger free and finished more softly. I am sorry. Kumaid pulled his trimmers free of the floor and offered his hand to Tanya. Tanya snarled mildly and pushed herself to a stand. It had been a humiliating point, one that hadn't hurt her at all physically, but damaged her ego far more than anyone other than her sensei could see. The girl finally looked to see what had lost her the match. Her eyes settled on Ryouga. Ryouga had been lost. He'd suddenly remembered his vow to find and punish Ranma for all the suffering caused to him. Leaving the UWSMA had proven far more difficult than finding it to begin with. When finding doors came to be a problem, Ryouga had taken to busting through the walls. This was one such instance, as he casually busted down one wall and made his way through the housekeeping/maintenance dojo. He managed little more than a muffled "excuse me" as he plodded through. Tanya glared equally at boys, and emblazoned him to her memory. She couldn't fault her opponent for being more focused, or her sensei for calling the point. But she could blame the jerk who'd caused her the loss in concentration. Her voice growled very low. Ryouga, I will not forgive you this indignity, and flinched only slightly as he continued on through the opposite wall, leaving her dojo in shambles. Wherever you go, one day. Hibiki Ryouga, I will avenge this flight. Tanya always was just a bit intense. She saw the cold stare Tanya now wore, and looked on as the finest oft external extremes dojo tromped off into the distance. He shrugged and thought to himself, if what I have heard of him is true, the revenge he sears will never be fulfilled. How does one find a person who cannot find himself? Ah well. Nori-san, we will begin your retraining tomorrow, when your wounds are less apparent. Both of you, walk to the health dojo and get the care you need. Kumaid, you have proven your worth. Your new training will begin in 2 days. Use your rest well. Now go. But Tanya was furious, but could do little to nothing. She wanted to go beat the crap out of that Hibiki punk, but could not refuse her teacher. Hi, sensei. She growled heavily and managed a forced bow. Kumaid bowed deeply, holding his chest and wincing. Hi, sensei. They made their way towards the health dojo, With Tanya still seething, Jishi shook his head and at his dojo narrowly. His gaze fell upon Feston students who even still looked about in amazed bewilderment, well, he called out, why are you all gawking? Get to work on repairs immediately. This was the housekeeping and maintenance dojo after all, the students here were more capable than those of any other. The way Jiichi saw it, repairs should be simple. 4 months came and went, and Tanya had found stalking Rio to be a wonderful pastime. She had managed to drag out of Megain info that Loshard got, and even if he was her boyfriend, that his brother Rio would be leaving to hunt Ryouga soon. Since then, she'd shadowed Rio stealthily whenever she could. It had almost become her hobby over the last month, and she was fairly certain Rio was oblivious to her presence. Then again, after observing him, she was of the opinion he was pretty oblivious in general. Rio wasn't anywhere near as inattentive as Tanya made him out to be, but pressing matters kept him from caring. He would soon have Ryouga in his sights, and he would avenge all his humiliation on the prodigy who had removed him from his top ranking. And all else was unimportant. Rio never noticed the dark-clad girl who now followed him, and he blatantly ignored any instinct which pointed out to him. And Tanya was truly good at what she did. Today, the tedium of shadowing Rio had changed. This was the day Rio has to leave in pursuit of Ryouga, and Tanya was ready for it. Perched in the rafters of the Environmental Extremes dojo, she craned ever so slightly to see the paperwork being handed to her Patsy. She shouldered a modest pack of her belongings and was ready for the journey. Tanya thought quietly to herself, all I need is for Rio to lead me right to Ryouga ... then I can take over from there. I haven't forgotten the indignity and humiliation that jerk caused me. He's mine, he is, and rightfully so. Such a loss of face for me, sensei, is unforgivable. She looked down as Rio pocketed the papers and stalked off. Soon, I will be avenged. This mission, by all rights, should have been mine. Bouncing soundlessly from rafter to rafter, she dropped to a graceful stand before the door and quickly made her way through it. She was on Rio's trail, and most certainly would not lose him. Well, this would have been true had it not been for the familiar thwack and accompanied darkness. ****. Once more, Tanya found herself pulling at the plunger, now hugging her face. Her words were probably not pleasant, not that anyone could hear them. A voice spoke up, and just where do you think you are going, Nori-san? Tanya found the plunger rather harshly yanked from her face. You weren't planning to leave with a word, now, were you? I had thought you a bit more responsible than that. She showed no real emotion, but he made his disappointment more than apparent. Tanya scanned the area, then the horizon, no sign of Rio. At all. She cursed to herself in English, then managed in her best Japanese, I lost him. I cannot follow now. Why did you do this, sensei? Frowning, she placed one hand on the girl's shoulder. He shook his sheet slowly. Your duties lie here with your dojo, Nori-san. Would you shame your dojo by abandoning it? But he's going after your Ryouga. That should be my fight. Yeah, it shouldn't be anyone's fight. Your failure that day was just your own. You allowed distraction to be your downfall. In a way, it was a valuable lesson. I suspect your concentration will never again be so easily shaken in the future. Tanya stammered helplessly. But, I do not approve of this hunt they've sent Musashi on. But it isn't me place to object. Those in my dojo, however, I have some say in their doings. You will stay and keep with your teachings. The sensei seemed to glare almost. He wasn't about to allow one of his prized pupils get caught up in what he viewed as foolish revenge, nor did he want her to have any dealings whatsoever with Ryo. It was bad enough she was being courted by one related to him. The mission they've sent Musashi on is mindless, and encourages spite. You will have nothing to do with it. Do I make myself clear? Hi. You had best mean that, Tanya. You're one of the finest. He didn't mean bolstering her ego. It wasn't a lie. Hi, Sensei. She nodded. Good. Now, join me in morning practice. The sensei walked away casually, knowing full well the girl's sense of duty would compel her properly. Tanya did a final scan of the surroundings. Nothing. Ryo was just gone. She grumbled and followed her sensei, just as she was told. But her thoughts still lingered. This ain't over, Ryouga. I'll find ya. I will not you haven't gotten out of this yet. The two disappeared into their dojo. ************ 3 years later. Present day. Nabiki frowned, looking at the Nuri file. Somewhat unsatisfactory. Just on a whim she flipped back to the UWSMA file and glanced it over. Unorthodox Weaponry School of Martial Arts UWSMA right parenthesis membership, unknown non-members in Mirima, Hibiki Ryouga. Muhashin Kyoko student, Muhashin Magain student, Muhashin Ryo student, Muhashin Ryoko student. History. The UWSMA was founded hundreds of years ago as a school to train martial artists on how to use any sort of weaponry, and handle any sort of environment, mainly for the purpose of training guardians to them of great importance. As time passed, for unknown reasons, the Uzma gradually faded from its once prominent position, but still exists today. Possible heavy influence on the strange techniques found in Mirima. Handwriting martial arts, tea ceremony martial arts, cheerleading martial arts. Reported to have been recently disbanded by unknown events but getting ready for a revival. She quickly added in the names Oshimu Jishi and Nuri Tanya, then closed the file again. Nabiki mulled over the possibilities on this case. Why was Nuri after Ryouga? Old rival? Fiancé? She laughed out loud briefly at that. How Ranma she mused. Still, there was no information yet that would bend Nuri to the role. That was the entire point of her files. No sense in lingering any further. Kuma was waiting, she had photos to deal, and had a feeling today she'd make a killing. Meanwhile, across the street, Tanya had the woman exiting the cafe with a measure of suspicion. She'd been patrolling around the neighborhood when she spotted her ex-boyfriend, Megan, talking to a girl down below. That was enough for her to be suspicious of what they were both up to. Or was it? Maybe she was just being paranoid. Ah, it's nothing to worry about, she reassured herself, then sprinted off across the rooftops. Megs went about this way, methinks. I ought to lead me straight to Rio. Who ought to lead me straight to Ryouga? And when I find him. Tanya grinned as she sprinted off in pursuit. She had a hibiki to find, and had a feeling today she'd make a killing. THEN. And the beginning hyphen equals writer single quote s comments. Well, here it is. This is the first and only thing I've made public. I don't know how good it is. I guess it could be considered a first attempt. This isn't the first thing I've ever written, but all else I've done has been exclusive to a small writing club, or stories that haven't either been made public. Anyway, I owe a lot to RPM for this one, without his aid and persistent prodding. This wouldn't have been written at all. Just another idea on a back burner somewhere. Also, my thanks to him for the editing and criticism, and putting up with my procrastination circumflex accent. It's not fully a Ranma 1/2 thick exactly, more of an introduction. And I gotta admit, I was rather afraid to put it out at all. Ah well, never know until you try. Northeast editor single quote s comments, rebirth of a character. Well, it started like this. Several months ago I was in my NDH total rewrite of the More Things Change left parenthesis n being a number higher than 20 but lower than infinity, and it was finally flowing nicely. A few friends of mine helped me get unjammed from severe writer's block. One friend of mine, I was encouraging her to start reading. She had an old fic that I read. It read fairly good, and I thought she could certainly do some stuff now. And so she brings up an old character design. A girl that uses England chimney sweep stuff to fight, and has a grudge against a certain lost boy thought was wandering through her place and caused a mess. That, by itself, was a fair plot. We both realized, thought, that she'd be a perfect candidate for the unorthodox weaponry school of martial arts. That, and I needed another rival to make Ryouga's life hell. After a lot of prodding, she started writing, and the final result is, a pretty nifty character for the Ranmavers. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did. CNCVARY much appreciated. -FPMBDW. Bonus points to whoever can name the artists that sang the titles to the story, and the 4 parts equals Nirima's Other Passion by Grayson Tollard Night had fallen in Nirima, and with it came the requisite dreams, starlight, and martial art aesthetics. The citizenry at large tried, as always, to ignore the occasional fanfare which was still audible through the reinforced and easily soundproofed rooftops favored in the local architecture. Children huddled in their beds and tried not to be afraid while a manic peal of laughter echoed through the night. The stalwart members of the Nirima police force left parenthesis all three of them hung out in a secluded basement drinking beer, playing darts, and pretending they'd never heard of assault and battery. To the casual observer, it seemed that the night belonged to the marital artists. It was not a stretch to say that the day belonged to them as well. And this was as it should be, for in Nirima there exists a passion for the martial arts which would have made ancient Sparta seem like a hippie commune. The eternal struggles, the hopeless romances, the devastating techniques, the fights to the supposedly death, these were the day-to-day dramas, comedies, and tragedies which gave Nirima its life and vitality. Most action films did very poorly at the local box offices. But, contrary to popular belief, the night was not wholly the domain of the marital artists. There were others home oft in the shadows, silent and invisible, always watching, always ready to act. Even the martial artists, with their keen senses and awareness of danger, had barely glimpsed at them. Tonight, they were waiting, as they always did. Cloaked in the blackness of night and shadow, they waited with tense anticipation. As always, it was one person in particular who carried their fondest hopes and secret desires. Hibiki Ryouga was wandering the night, brooding. This would hardly have been a surprise to those who knew him. Nor would it have come as a terrible surprise to learn what it was that he was getting himself into such a lather about. As if to alleviate any doubt, not that he thought anybody was watching him, he threw a punch at a nearby concrete wall, shattering it like glass, and shouted the name, Audio and the enemy. Curse you. Oh sure, they had buried the hatchet about a lot of their past grievances. Ryouga was cured of the pig, he had let go Falcon, and the bread feud was long over. But there was still no person alive who could annoy Ryouga quite so thoroughly as Ranma. It had started when Ranma had been boasting about a supposedly inevitable success in the upcoming King of Nirima tournament. The sound of Ranma stroking his own ego was 1,000 times worse than the sound of fingernails raking the surface of a chalkboard. As far as Ryouga was concerned. Hey, if it's got martial arts in it, Ranma had asserted smugly, I can't lose. It had been at this juncture that Ryouga had felt it necessary to remind Ranma of the anything-goes martial arts obstacle course race. Sure, Ryuga's memories of the whole thing were bittersweet, as were virtually all of his memories, since he had been unable to take advantage of the trip to China he had won in the race, couldn't find the airport. But that didn't matter, not really. He had won that time. He had beaten Ranma in a martial arts competition, fair and square. Ranma seemed to conveniently forget that. Oh, that wasn't really a fight, Ranma had said dismissively. Besides, you'd have never made it to the finish line if I hadn't helped you out along the way, right, Chan? He had yelled at Ranma to shut up, still petrified that Akan would someday figure out the whole P-chan thing and execute a terrible revenge. As always, Akan had completely missed the reference, and had simply bashed Ranma on the head for picking on Ryouga. And then the conversation had morphed on. Ryuga's thoughts, however, had been stuck on Nisu all day, and well into the evening. Ranma's ego. Ranma's damned luck. Ranma's victories. There were times when he had come so close to beating Ranma fair and square. Just a little more luck, just a little more time. He knew he had what it took to beat Ranma. Ryouga ran through his memories of so many fights with his bigger rival. He was sure that if Akan hadn't interrupted their fight at the martial arts figure skating tournament left parenthesis double quote the Charlotte Cup, indeed, he would have defeated Saotom. So many times Ranma had escaped defeat because Ryouga had inconveniently turned into a pig. Then there was the time that Kuno had interrupted, and that other time if that, and so on. But he found, as he searched his memories, thought kept coming back to one particular day. He had just learned the Bakusai Tenketsu technique from Cologne, and Ranma had fought in the countryside. There had been no interruptions, no distractions, and he had almost won. If only, Ryouga growled. If only Cologne had told him the true purpose of his training in the breaking point technique, rather than allowing him to believe that he could actually use the attack directly on Ranma. Ranma had survived the day because Ryouga had been telegraphing his attacks, attempting to get one good shot in with the Bakusai Tenketsu and end the fight in a single blow. Had he known that such an offensive strategy was worthless, he knew he would have beaten Ranma with conventional martial arts. Ranma's blows had glanced off him like a gentle rainfall that day. Gods, he had never felt that strong before. Maybe he hadn't beaten Ranma then, but he'd sure as hell whipped that smug look off his face for a while. Clearly, on the day of that fight, Ryuga's endurance had been at its peak. While his durability and strength rating-wise remained higher than Ranma's, he knew that he had never been at quite that magnificent level of near invulnerability since the time immediately after his week of brutal training with rock and rope. It only made sense, then, that if he were to match the intensity of Kalagni's regimen, if he were to surpass it, then he would push his endurance past even the limits that he and Yukai had tested when they had trained together in the countryside. Then, when it came time to fight in the tournament, his body would be like a piece of iron, impervious to even Ranma's strongest blows. It would be painful, to be sure. But what was mere physical pain to one such as Hibiki Ryouga? What were a few nights of body-wrecking torture when compared with the opportunity to see that fear in Ranma's eyes again? On the surface, Ryouga understood that there were other fighters in the King of Nirima tournament, but in his heart it was the same battle that he had been fighting for years. Him against Ranma. This time, it was a tournament. This time, he wouldn't be turning into a pig. This time, there would be no interruptions. This time, there would be no place for Ranma to run. This time, Essay audio and the anime. This time you will fall. And with that, Ryouga took a running start, took a flying leap, and hit a concrete embankment head first at full speed. Muhashin Ryo had been watching Ryouga for the better part of the evening, as was his occasional habit when he had news for matters of great import to attend and when he had grown tired of arguing with his youngest sibling about possible alternatives to his current hairstyle. Accustomed as he was to Ryouga's violent mood swings and unpredictable shifts of direction, even he would not have guessed thought Ryouga would, out of the blue, suddenly begin to fling himself head first into whatever solid objects he could find. Wham! This time it was the side of a parking garage. Ryouga met its spread eagle after springing off a street lamp. Ryo watched with morbid fascination as his rival peeled himself out of the vaguely Ryouga-shaped crater in the wall, staggered around woozily, and then backed up to take another flying leap at the damaged wall. "Our enemy!" he shouted. Wham! The facade collapsed. Ryouga was buried under an avalanche of concrete and rebar. Ryo watched, a curious twinkle in his close-sunk usually-like eyes, as Ryouga extricated himself from the wreckage, laughed like a maniac, then charged off in a random direction. At first, Ryo couldn't fathom what the idiot thought he was doing. It seemed like the lost boy was intent on beating himself to a pulp. While Ryo could certainly understand that sentiment, he somehow doubted that Ryouga was attempting to end his own life in this rather unorthodox fashion. It also didn't explain why he was shouting his friend's name, over and over, in what was assuredly rage. Was he hallucinating? Perhaps. It seemed there was always the odd poison, potion, or drug floating around Nerima. Perhaps Ryouga had gotten a whiff of something. Ryo watched as Ryouga staggered towards a fairly busy street. His rival wobbled a bit as he watched the cars copy, then seemed to notice the tunnel several dozen meters away. An idea seemed to seize him, and he took a flying leap onto the top of the next delivery truck which passed by. He found his footing on the top of the truck, turned on faced the upcoming stone lip of the tunnel with arms akimbo, and was summarily slammed into the overhang like a bandana-clad wrecking ball. Ryo, with great effort, managed to bite back a bark of derisive laughter. Ryouga's body fell from the tunnel overhang onto the road where he was immediately run over by a bus coming the other way. He skittered off the road and into a nearby park, slamming to a halt against a thick tree trunk. Ryo approached cautiously, and was astonished to hear the boy snickering. "Goo. Good one." Ryouga was muttering to himself. "I wonder if I can find that tunnel again." He wasn't hallucinating. He knew what he was doing. What nerve could he possibly? As Ryouga staggered to his feet and began a futile search for the tunnel, Ryo finally divined the answer. Ryouga was training. It was his own demented version of the boulder on a rope Bakusai Tenketsu training that Ryo had witnessed in China. He was training, toughening himself up for the King of Nerima tournament. The revelation affected Ryo on several levels, though he would never have admitted it. On one level, he was tremendously annoyed at Hibiki. The idiot was obviously doing this because he was fixated on being so dumb. Ryouga was, to a degree, insulted. It would have been gratifying if Ryouga had been shouting, "Mohashin!" as he battered his way around Nirima. After all, Ryo spent every other waking hour obsessing about how he would best Hibiki. It would, he felt, have only been appropriate if Hibiki had returned the favor. Less than why would he need to ? Greater than a small voice in Ryo's head skid snidely. Less than after all, he's always beaten you ... Greater than a small, violent mental struggle ensued. Ryo didn't put up with that kind of talk from anybody, even his own subconscious. Still, at another level, he could not help but be grudgingly impressed by the spectacle of self-abuse before him. Thought Ryouga had inhuman endurance came as no surprise, though it was always rather jarring to see it so spectacularly displayed. It was Ryuga's willingness to put himself through immense physical punishment for training that made Ryo uneasy. He could cover it all he wanted by calling Hibiki an idiot, a fool, a madman, an adult masochist. But the fact was that his rival was showing a level of reckless bravery that he, Ryo, would never be able to match. Ryo knew that if he followed Ryuga's example, if he trained himself in taking impacts with that kind of rigorous abandon, that he would also benefit from it. But he also knew that he would never be able to commit to abusing himself in that fashion. He liked to think of it as using his head for strategy rather than for a battering ram. He liked to interpret this as another sign that he was smarter than Ryouga. He didn't want to listen to what the voice in his head that sounded like Sensei Miyagi had to say about the whole matter. Hibiki had not found his tunnel, but he had found something else while Ryo was musing. The lost boy was atop a high diving board, which was in turn positioned above a dry swimming pool. At first, Ryo thought the idiot was just going to swan dive into the concrete, but then he realized that Ryouga was fumbling with a long rope. Hibiki kept checking the pool, measuring off a length of rope, muttering to himself, and generally trying to focus his mind through his punch-drunk gaze. Finally, seemingly satisfied, he stood up, took a test hop on the board, and hurled himself into the air. "Our enemy!" he bellowed as he plummeted almost 20 meters into the concrete. Then Ryo saw the purpose of the rope. The other end had been affixed to the high diving board, which bent to the limit of its flexibility at the terminus of Ryuga's dive. A moment after he pounded into the concrete, the board snapped back. The recoil hurled the lost boy skywards again, up through the air past the board itself. And down he came once more. Ryo watched as the diving board dribbled Ryouga like a basketball against the bottom of the dry swimming pool. Hibiki howled confused battle cries along the way, concrete shattered, and the high dive creaked on his foundations. Something somewhere had to give, and it ended up being the high dive. As Ryouga made his descent after who knew how many repetitions, The whole platform groaned with fatigue. Instead of snapping him back into the air, the diving apparatus supports, ladder, pillar, board and all plunged down after him into the pool. The thunder of destruction echoed through the night. Almost a full minute passed, and Rio was actually beginning to hope that Hibiki had truly damaged himself in nice extravagant gesture. But then he emerged, covered with the dust of pulverized concrete. His clothes were tattered, his hair was a tangle, and he was covered with bruises and small cuts. But he was laughing. Ryouga turned and surveyed the wreckage of the pool, nodding in satisfaction. "You'll see, Ranma," he growled, then coughed up a lungful of dust. "You'll see." Still smiling, the lost boy staggered towards a tree trunk, found a soft spot of grass, and collapsed into a deep sleep. Rio approached the recumbent martial artist, cautiously at first, but knowing full well that Ryouga slept like a low 7 under the best of circumstances. After that ordeal, he single quote D probably sleep through a natural disaster. Rio stood off for his hated enemy, glaring down at him, and thinking. He had been in this position before. He had refrained from killing Ryouga in his sleep when he'd had the chance, knowing that such an attack would not truly bring him the satisfaction that he so keenly needed. But tonight he was not so sure if he shouldn't just get it over with right there. There's nothing quite like the certain knowledge that you are going to be facing a true maniac in battle. Rio had always known that his rival had the mental fitness of a schizophrenic emu, but he had always been loath to accept that this trait actually gave Hibiki any actual advantage in a confrontation. Still, he wasn't quite as certain tonight. Not even Rio had to admit he couldn't match Ryouga for pure lunacy, so he'd have to rely on his intellect, which he was confident was far superior to Hibiki's. And the intelligent thing to do would be to kill the fool right here and now. Or perhaps there was another way. He might be able to turn Hibiki's own insanity against him. If he gave Ryouga an injury here, something that would not completely cripple him but would take a long time to heal, something that Nashizu's madman would not allow to stop him in the tournament, something that Rio could turn to his advantage. Yes, that was good. Ryouga would think he'd hurt himself in this absurd training. Nobody would know better. Everybody would see Rio triumph over his hated foe once and for all. Rio didn't mind stacking the deck in Hai's favor. Rio had a rather comprehensive understanding of human anatomy. He made a decision about just what sort of injury he wanted to inflict. He stole a quick glance about to make sure nobody was watching, then raised his umbrella above Ryuga's prone form. The needle-sharp tip of the umbrella gleamed silver in the moonlight. "Hold it right there." Rio whirled and shot towards the voice. He was astonished to see well over a dozen figures emerging from the shadows, cloaked in black, wearing hard hats. They were adorned with toolboxes and tool belts, but there was not a single clink of metal to be heard. Rio couldn't believe that he'd been taken unaware by a single person, much less a whole group of them. How long had they been there? His anger began to rise. One of them, a small woman, rushed to Ryouga's side unmoved, tenderly inspecting him for wounds. The rest moved in, surrounding Ryo in an unmistakably threatening fashion. Ryo refused to be intimidated. "I don't know who you are," he said casually, "but it would be best for your collective health if you took this opportunity to leave the way that you came. You stay away from him." The woman hissed. Ryo raised an eyebrow. "This is not your business, whoever you are." His plan was probably ruined with so many potential witnesses, but he refused to be backed down. A man stepped forward from the black-clad crowd. He had a severe face and his eyes burned with an intense fervor. "Normally, we are sworn not to interfere. But tonight, Kamamahashin Ryo, we cannot allow this travesty." They knew his name. A large band of, whatever they were, gifted with stealth that would make a ninja look like a pregnant hippo, and he didn't even know who they were. This was starting to get on his nerves. "Who?" he's trying to keep his irritation from showing. "Do you people think you are?" "In Mirima," the man said, "there exist two great passions. You are of the tribe that represents the martial artists Kama who travel in the light, who fight the battles. But we are of the ones who travel in darkness, never revealed, ever silent. We are the yang to the martial artists' Shin. We are the balancing force at the other end of the seesaw. Without us, you could not exist. Without you, we could never survive." "What on earth are you talking about?" The woman tending to Ryouga spoke up. "We are the Nirima Public Works Corps." Ryo blinked in surprise. "Beg your pardon? When you martial artists battle, when the ground trembles as you modern titans clash, who do you think repairs the damage? When you shatter a wall, demolish a tree, or make a crater in a street, who do you think it is that patches the concrete, plants the seed, or paves over the asphalt?" The man who Ryo assumed to be their leader nodded. "He's correct. We are the menders, who come at night and make ill things into." Ryo was slightly taken aback. Until now, it hadn't really occurred to him how the damage that was done in the multitude of martial arts fights got mended. He felt rather embarrassed that he had failed to consider this before. He shouldn't have. It's a blind spot that all Mirima martial artists have. The same blind spot exists in certain inhabitants of Graviton City, where a similar public works corps also exists. Still, he might well turn this to his advantage. "I see," he said. "Then we owe you a great deal. But I assure you, if you let me continue my work for tonight, life will be considerably easier for you. After all, this..." He gestured at Ryouga, mentally fishing for a sweet ugly vitriolic term. "This moronic lunatic probably causes more damage to Nirima than all the other martial artists combined. If I eliminate him..." "We know that," the woman snapped. "Of course we know that. Why do you think we love him so?" Ryo blinked. "What? Don't you see?" the leader explained. "We live to repair damage. It is our great joy in life. Ever since this wonderful, destructive boy came into our lives, we have had the opportunity to practice our skills and techniques like never before. The woman smiled fondly down at the still sleeping Ryouga. We have followed him since he first arrived. Oh, we don't interfere directly, but we've helped him in secret ways when we could. We've left food out for him when he's gotten lost, or hot water when he's needed it, and helped him find his clothes and gear when he's lost them. Less than Hibiki loses his clothes ? Greater than Rio wondered. Less than is he even a bigger idiot than I thought ? Greater than the others murmured their agreement around Rio. He was always great, one commented, but once he learned thought Bakusai Tenketsu technique. Well, there's nobody else who can wreak such utter havoc. Rio narrowed his eyes. He's not the only one who uses that technique, you know. The woman gave him a cold gaze. Oh yes, Mahashin, we know who can do it too. But you don't cause a fraction of the damage that our beloved Ryouga does. That's right, another said. You're nothing compared to him. Adore it. There was probably no single phrase which could ignite Rio's temper as quickly as that one. He didn't care about witnesses now. Get out of my way, he snapped at the members of the Public Work Corps, brandishing his umbrella, or I shall be more than willing to give you a piece of what Hibiki has coming to him tonight. The woman leaned protectively over Hibiki. No. Bad enough that shampoo is gone. I won't let you take him. Rio scoffed. Madame, I'm sure I don't care about which personal hygienic products you have misplaced. If I have to dispose of you to get to Hibiki, so be it. He drew back his umbrella, ready to knock her out of his path. Hisoka electrical wiring strike. Rio leaped backwards as one of the shadowy figures stepped forth. A spray of electrical wires and cables flew outwards from the man's extended hand, snaking their way towards Rio like living things. He swiped with his umbrella, knocking the bulk of them aside as he dodged the remainder. All right, he snarled, if you insist. There was an easy way to disperse a crowd of foes. G-O-U-H-I-U-G-E-K-I-Ken. He shouted, spraying down a shower of wild ki blasts towards the assembled crew. Some of them would also assuredly strike Ryouga, but that didn't bother Rio much. The energy rain pelted the turf, sending up chunks of soda grass, but the Nirima Public Works Corps were nowhere to be seen. Less than greater than he thought, less than forgot about their stealth techniques. Greater than he looked over to Ryouga to see if the errant blasts had done much damage. To his surprise, it seemed that a brick wall which had been hastily erected between himself and Ryouga had absorbed the attack. Impressive, he said, but if you think mere brick can keep him out. Suddenly, an extremely large and muscular member of the Public Works Corps stood before him, practically materializing out of the shadows in a most disconcerting fashion. I am Masataro, the steel bender, he announced. Think that you can pass me. The giant reached for Rio, but he was far too slow to catch the expert martial artist. Rio took a quick swipe at the large man's right knee, Not hard enough to break the bone but hard enough to topple him. Misataro dropped to his knees with a grunt of pain. As Ryo drew back for a strike which would render the nuisance unconscious, heard a series of rapid clicks and bangs. He turned, and discovered to his astonishment that his arm umbrella and all had been trapped in a chaotic tangle of shiny new pipes, protruding from the ground. Another of the public works corps stood beside the pipe prison, twirling a hex wrench on the end of his finger. Gokomatsu Special Instant Plumbing Defense, he commented. Ryo growled and energized his free fist with key energy. Haslammed the brass and iron prison with a sweeping blow, tearing free bolts and fittings. With another blow, he wrenched his arm and umbrella free of the twisted trap. The plumber backed away from the enraged martial artist with his eyes wide. Ryo took a step forward to deliver a rapid punch, but suddenly discovered that his feet were rooted to the spot. Hiroma's ultimate quick-drying cement technique, came the explanation. Ryo's legs were encased up to the knees in solid concrete. Ryo's frustration level was on the rise. Bakusuden, he barked, focusing the breaking point strike through the tip of his umbrella. The concrete prison exploded. Two-fist cocking gun attack. Another one shouted. Ryo hurled and opened his umbrella like a spinning shield. Twin streams of thick spackle struck the umbrella and sprayed off to either side in a shower of irregular white blobs. Hammer and nail rapid fire technique. Came the call of another public worker. Ryo swiveled and ducked under the stream of nails which lanced through the air towards him. He noted, with a certain degree of grudging respect, that the attacker wasn't using a nail gun. She threw handfuls of nails into the air and struck them with her hammer at impressive speeds. The flying nails embedded themselves in a neat row in the wood of a tree behind him. Ryo took a step back, attempting to assess the foes arranged around him, when something took a hold of him and hurtled him into the air. 1 second he had been standing on solid ground, and the next he was locked in the branches of a cherry tree. Who had thrown him up here? Kozakura instant cherry tree ascension, came the answer. He disentangled himself from the tree and dropped to the ground, in time to see the tree finish the last few inches of its explosive growth. Less than am I dreaming ? Greater than he wondered. Less than did they really just grow a tree right under my feet ? Greater than the Nirima Public Works Corps had arranged themselves as defensively in front of Ryouga once more. Their leader spoke. As you can see, our public works techniques are every bit as refined as your own combat skills. They must be, if we are to keep pace with you martial artists. Ryo sighed. Sometimes, it just didn't pay to let your anger take over. There were over a dozen of these fanatics already before him. Defeating them could take all night, and he had lost the momentum to keep going with such a futile struggle. So, Hibiki has a crew of secret protectors, he said. You understand, of course, that we intend to rid the world of that fanged annoyance. If y'all seek to get in my way, we have pledged not to interfere in the clashes between martial artists, the leader asserted. Ryo smirked. Oh? And what would you call this? The woman who had been hovering over Ryouga answered. When you switch from being a martial artist to an assassin, all bets are off. I wasn't going to. Ryo shrugged. Never mind. Tag it your way. But I intend to bury this Kraken, and I intend to do it soon. You lot are entitled to put flowers on his grave when I'm done, but if you interfere in our fight, he let the threat dangle, unspoken. We understand, the leader said. Even if it means losing your beloved Hibiki Ryouga, we shall not interfere. Very well, Ryo nodded. He felt he had managed to save enough face in this whole sorry encounter to make a dignified departure. So long, Nirima Public Works Corps. It's been educational. Ryouga struggled his way back to consciousness shortly after the first rays of dawn had struck his face. He experienced his customary wave of disorientation, uncertain of where he was or how he had ended up sleeping here. Discovering Fod was outdoors, on a soft bed of grass, with the morning songs of birds in the air was a pleasant change from some oft surprises to which he'd awakened in the past. He rose to his feet, yawning and stretching. He was somewhat sore from his training, but it was a pleasant sort of soreness that felt almost comforting. For a moment his mind tried to go back to its previous train of thought left parenthesis rage towards Ranma, but then his stomach intervened with some pressing demands regarding breakfast. Less than hope I can find Yukaifu's place, greater than he thought. As he was turning to leave, he almost failed to notice the green apple at his feet. Less than Must be my lucky day. Greater than Ryouga picked up the ripe fruit, polished it up with a bandana, and took a bite. He leaned against a cherry tree, surveying the pristine beauty of the park for a moment. Sunlight glittered off the shiny rails of the high-dip platform in the empty pool nearby. Picking what he felt was a likely direction, he began his search for his home once again. As always, he was unaware of the eyes that followed eyes' progress, the gazes of those who stood in the shadow, their hearts full of love and gratitude that he would never know. End. Author's notes. The more things change / the pursuit of happiness. By Running.com is probably my favorite running Ranma fanfic series. In order for this story to make sense, it is rather essential to have read those writings. This little story fits into the time frame of the pursuit of happiness, shortly before the King of Nirima martial arts tournament. The origin of this story begins with my musings upon how fixes the damage done by local martial artists in the Ranma left parenthesis and other online series. The Nirima Public Works Corps seemed the only logical conclusion. I figured that the only way that any community would put up with the sort of nonsense that goes on in Nirima was if there were a counterbalancing element to the destructive forces in play, an element which actually enjoyed dealing with the chaos and restoring the damaged property. Copyright stuff. All the Ranma characters belong to Takahashi Rumiko. Mahashin Rio and the King of Nirima tournament were created by Ravenji Hardy April 1998. Grayson at Ryouga.net